Hello and welcome to the Eastern Front. My name is Yulia Zhoja. I'm with the Middle East Institute, Georgetown, and George Washington Universities, and I'm joined by my colleagues.
Giselle Donnelly. I work at the American Enterprise Institute, as does
Dalibor Rohac. We are both senior fellows at AEI.
On our podcast, we talk about the many challenges to European peace that tend to emerge along a line running from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Eastern Front, and about why those matter to the United States. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Tona Akubadia, who is a member of the Georgian Parliament and deputy chair of the Defense and Security Committee in the Georgian Parliament. Tona, it's great to have you. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. When we met in DC a few weeks ago, it was, I believe, just a few hours after the disaster at the Novakahovka Dam. And I remember then that I sat down, it was a group of us from Georgia, from Romania, from Poland, and I said, did you guys know that Moscow had done this in the past? And I remember Tona saying, we had just met, and she was saying, yes, of course. And others had the same tone of, this is nothing new. And now we are still kind of at the international level, I guess, processing the events that happened at the end of June around Prigozhin and Putin. And we want to ask you, Tona, all about Georgia, the upcoming NATO summit, and regional security. But maybe as a start, we can talk about the impact in Tbilisi. Tbilisi is one of these unique places that has very recent experience with Russian aggression and Russian invasion. And so Georgians have very well-formed opinions about Russia. So now you have a kind of a privileged position seeing these debates. How would you describe people are understanding and interpreting the events over the last few days in Russia?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. I think it's a very great program, and I listen to you pretty often, and it's a good opportunity to provide Georgian perspective for your audience. Firstly, yes, we do have a huge experience knowing Russia, unfortunately, because of the Soviet occupation, past with the Russian Tsarism, and also we have witnessed Russian aggression in 2008, before it was in early 90s, and now we see the continuation of the aggression in Ukraine. So people of Georgia know what Russia wants to, and we don't want to be a sphere of influence of Russia anymore. So we are fighting to become member of European and Euro-Atlantic family. And these events in Russia just recent, also it was a big issue and a big hope because we see the weaknesses of Putin's regime. We see defeat, strategic defeat of Russia in Ukraine, and now we are expecting that Putin's regime will be over, despite the fact that it will not change revisionist Russian foreign policy spirit. And it was a huge joy of the people seeing how Putin's regime is getting weaker. And then we saw the end of the story, or the end of the first season, maybe. But it brought a big discussion after Prigozhin was dismissed to Belarus, or we don't know where is he now. But after the stopping of the his march to Moscow. And it was a domestic politics, to be honest, not the foreign policy. Unfortunately, Georgian government did not evaluate it, the threats which it would bring to Georgia. I mean, threats of these processes because of the migration crisis. We have witnessed a lot of Russian migrants due to this military conscription in Georgia, and around like 100,000 Russians we have in Georgia after that, and there was a threat of a migration crisis, threat of North Caucasus, Chechnya, Kadyrov's statement against Georgia, and possible scenarios. So opposition, we were calling to Prime Minister to hold the National Security Council meeting to discuss the threats and challenges and to have some reactions in terms of the policy planning. But they were silent, and next day it became an issue of domestic politics, who supports whom, and that this is the only government bringing peace in Georgia out of all the governments in history of the Second Republic of Georgia since regaining the independence. And it is a very short policy without any vision, because inevitably we are sure in Georgia that Putin's regime will be defeated in Ukraine with the support of the West and with the bravery fight of Ukrainians for their sovereignty and independence. It gives hope for Georgia that we will protect our sovereignty in line with Ukraine, which is violated by Russia, and we will overcome the increased influence of Russia in Georgia, which we feel and witness in many areas. So this is the main issue now, and we believe that it is inevitable, and this precedent demonstrated the weakness of Putin's regime, demonstrated the disagreement between Siloviki, and I think that this is the first sign of dismantling the Putin's regime and Putin's power.
So there are some in the West who say, especially on America's political right, who say that we should not be rejoicing prematurely because whoever is going to replace Putin might be worse than Putin himself. And we've seen versions of this argument emerge on social media and elsewhere over this past weekend during the Prigozhin mutiny, where people were sort of saying, you liberals are so naive that you sort of expect Prigozhin to be a reformer, which hasn't been a proposition made by anybody. But I think what is relevant in the context of Russia is that whoever replaces Putin will, in order to be a real autocrat, will have to consolidate power, and that takes energy, effort, resources. It's not an easy thing to do. So by default, whoever replaces Putin will be a weaker ruler than Putin, at least from the get-go. Is that the sense that is this sense sort of shared and understood by Georgians and more broadly denizens of the Caucasus and sort of Central Asia?
Firstly, we know what Russia's revisionism means because since 1801, Georgia became part of the Russian Empire forcefully, and then we were part of the Russian Soviet Republic forcefully, and it was occupation. And now we are still fighting against Russian influences. So we know that despite the leadership in Russia, that's the nature of Russia, to imperialistic nature, and we don't hope on a better leader in Russia, but we hope on the window of opportunity. It was for me very interesting to hear Putin's statement just right next morning when Prigozhin started his march. He compared it to 1917 revolution, and he said that Russia lost territories with this agreement that they withdrew from the First World War, and they should not admit that. So it was very interesting historical parallels, he said. And if he thinks that if Putin's regime is over, it will be expenses of on the expenses of losing the territories of Russia, and they believe that part of Ukraine it is Russia against all international rules-based order. Then it is an opportunity for Ukraine, opportunity for Georgia, and opportunity for the West. To buy the time and to do the proper enlargement of NATO, including Georgia and Ukraine into NATO, to ensure the Euro-Atlantic security and to ensure the Europol free and at peace. And it is a chance that the policy should not be business as usual with Russia after this happens. And this is the hope people of Georgia has. And victory of Ukraine adequately means victory of Georgia, despite the difficulties we have in Georgia, because it is a principle of sovereignty, which is not only occupation of 20% of territories of Georgia or Ukraine, but also it is a sovereignty of will of people. It is a democracy, and it is our foreign policy priority, which is NATO and EU. So that's the belief people has it, and all the public opinion polls prove that the support for EU is like 90%, and support of NATO is 85%. That it is a historical support which we didn't had before in previous years, because the hope is here.
If I could even push this point, probably past the point of its design tolerance, it does. Just reflecting on the Prigozhin incident, it does seem to me that it might be fair to place it in the context of even larger historical forces, meaning the unraveling of the Russian Empire. I mean, this does seem like 1991, like the various Maidans in Ukraine, some of the, I mean, and in Georgia as well. And apropos of Western opinion, that is a little bit of a frightening prospect, has been for Americans, just because of the instability. I think that's the wrong way to look at things, that the world will be better off when this process continues and is complete. But I wanted to ask a sort of follow-up question about this. And Yulia, you may have a point of view on this as well. I'm wondering really if we're uncovering a kind of Black Sea consciousness or frame of mind or, regional perspective that's certainly been invisible to the United States, been invisible probably to Western Europe for a long time, where all our relations with former Soviet states were routed through Moscow. So, I read too much vast history for my own good, and it affects my frame of mind. But I'd be interested, Teona, in your point of view, but also Yulia's, trying to wrap my head around where we are in the larger historical process.
I'll let Teona talk about it, because for one, she's been doing this. She's been a Black Sea girl longer than I have.
Oh my goodness.
And I'll ask you about that. But also because I think our listeners have heard a lot from me on the Black Sea over the.
Well, it would be good to
when it-
define what that entails. I mean, we've talked about the existence of it, but we haven't talked about what it positively is, if it does exist.
Maybe to kind of frame that additionally with something that seems niche, but again, I think Teona is the right person to brief us on this. Is not many people outside of the Black Sea region know that Romania and Georgia, on the two ends of the Black Sea, have recently signed a strategic partnership. And Teona has been one of the, if not the central, she'll tell us, designers of it. And it's connected to, I guess, more awareness and certainly more projects of infrastructure, interconnectivity, building into regional organizations and sub-organizations to push for the things that I guess in one form or another, with ample bipartisan political support, both countries have been trying to bring to the surface of particularly NATO and EU basically since 2008 in one form or another, or even earlier, but particularly since 2008, and were not heard again and again until maybe 2022. So is that a good frame, Teona, to look at it?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, Black Sea, it is a connectivity, and it is a gateway to rest of the Europe. But contrary, Russia wants to turn it to the lake, and we saw the strategic balance change since the Crimean annexation by Russia, but nobody talks about this willingness when there was a war in 2008, and when Russia occupied part of Georgia, Abkhazia. There is a Black Sea port in Chamchire, and they built the military base in there, and they're using it also as a part of the Black Sea for the military purposes, as well as also for slightly economic one. So occupied Abkhazia and occupied Crimea, it is part of the Russia's strategy to turn it to its own lake. And contrary, when we were pushing the strategic partnership with Romania, and this first Black Sea Security Initiative actually it started in 2015 NATO Wales Summit, and in 2016 there was some concept of Black Sea security, where Georgia and Ukraine, as partners and aspirant countries, became part of it. But it was not sufficient and enough, and we both, Georgia and Ukraine, were pushing for more in terms of the Black Sea security. And now we see the problems. I mean, there is a Montreux Convention, and we don't have any Black Sea fleet ship visits since the war in Ukraine has been waged by Russia, full-scale one. And also, in terms of this strategic vision, I think there is more to be done. From a U.S. perspective, the Black Sea security strategy, there should be Georgia and Ukraine, not only in terms of the political level, but also military and also economic. There is software security, soft security issues, economy, connectivity is a new thing, and now we are in the process of building the Black Sea energy cable. Now there is this research on that topic, and there was a deal from EU with the leader of Azerbaijan about the Black Sea connectivity and energy, green energy. It is also energy corridor and increased transit of energy resources from Caspian Sea to Black Sea. And we had a project with deep sea Anaklia port to be built, which was failed because of inadequate will of the government. And unfortunately, if we would have the deep sea port in Anaklia, it would serve not only the economic needs of Georgia, but also strategic interests. When we talk about the strategic partnership with Romania, we do have a good framework, which needs to be filled with the issues. Now, the direct cargo ship from Constanța port to Poti was open. Just it will be the first ship in this week, which is also important for economy. But without deep sea port, without proper strategy, I would say, not only this deep sea port, from the US and from the NATO allies, and without proper engagement of Ukraine and Georgia into Black Sea security, maybe after the war is over, there will be no security in the wider Black Sea region. And when we talk about the Three Sea Initiative, and it's not only just the Black Sea, and when we talk about the wider Black Sea region, first there is a need of the strategic vision, and then the proper strategy to be implemented. And there will be no security, I strongly believe, without Ukraine, without Georgia into NATO, and there will be no connectivity if there is no proper vision and transportation corridor, logistic hub, and also the transit opportunities. Georgia is a gateway, and it is a region important because we share the same values with Europe and with the West. So, to me, now it is a time to reshuffle the previous vision and to do it more coherent way, and to also limit the Russian increased influence in the region, because we witness it a lot.
If I may just stay on this point for another second, I was always struck by the fact that connectivity is being emphasized as a sort of central pillar of, say, the Three Seas initiative and sort of similar efforts in this space. And my concern is that I fear that connectivity as such is a sort of value neutral term that can encompass many different things, some of them more desirable than others. You could say that the Nord Stream 2 project was a connectivity project in some way. And so I think what the Three Seas initiative in particular needs, and I suspect the same might apply to the sort of broader Black Sea region as a whole, is a sort of sense of political direction and political strategy that would then effectively discriminate between different connectivity projects, and that would also take a hard look not only on Russia's influence but also on the role that China is trying to play in that space. How advanced is the China conversation in Georgia these days? Again, like in Washington, you were in DC not that long ago. Every conversation turns towards China within first 10 minutes. So we actually managed to run this podcast for 21 minutes without mentioning China.
With China, we have a free trade agreement since 2015, and the level of influence has been increased not only in Georgia but in the South Caucasus. And it's not only culture and it's not only education. It's also the political. It's not that dangerous nowadays, but it is obvious that we see the increase. And in this context where we have the regional actors like Russia, like Turkey in the region, Iran, very near neighboring Armenia, this peace deal agreement process, which is led by US between Azerbaijan and Armenia, the main issue should be a vision from the US in terms of the increasing the presence and protecting the shared values, and how to contain this interest, whether it is Russia, whether it is China, and that's the main thing to me. Because otherwise, I mean, if you compare like 5 years ago or 2015 context to nowadays, and there are many reports about China's increased influence and interest over the region, you will witness progress in that field. But I don't see, to be honest, a proper strategy why it might be a problem from our partner countries, or what kind of interest China will have in like 5 years after, in terms of the economy, in terms of the culture, and in terms of even the military, maybe. So the problem is that because of the turbulence, because of the war, there is a lack of strategic vision. And also the challenge is the government, the current one, GD, which is absolutely okay with increase of Chinese interest or increase of Russian influences even. So that's why it is important to have a clear vision, and also it is important to contain Russian influences and support democracy process in Georgia despite the challenges.
I also want to ask you, I promised this early on about NATO and the upcoming summit, and you and I talked offline about this before. And while preparing for this podcast, I was looking at your bio on the Georgian parliament, and I realized, that's why I said earlier, she's been doing this longer than me, that you were starting Georgia NATO in the context of the Black
Since 2005.
2005. That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
And when we're looking at Georgia and NATO and Ukraine and NATO, I guess the key year that everyone is thinking about is 2008, the Bucharest summit, the Black Sea Circle closes, right? That infamous summit with the half-hearted promise. We know now so much about the background, so much speculation. And a few months later, Putin rolls into Georgia, starts his atrocities, and now we're in 2023. And we have mixed expectations, to say, like in the best case scenario, about the Vilnius summit. On this podcast, we talked in many instances about this. So you looking back, I guess two in one question, but you looking back since 2008-ish or before 2008, and then into now 2023, how has Georgia's relationship to NATO transformed over the years? And what kind of hopes do you have in the very limited circumstances that are imposed by both the West, but also the GD, Georgian Dream in Tbilisi? What do you expect, or what are you hoping for, looking at the Vilnius summit in a few weeks from now?
Thank you very much. It's a very important question. Firstly, I do believe that one bright day Georgia will become a NATO member. And it's not that I believe in God, it's an opportunity I believe in. Uh,
How about pink ponies?
exactly. And in terms of the NATO Vilnius summit, I initiated the joint address in the Parliament of Georgia for all NATO states to firm our request to support Georgia. And not only to firm our willingness to join NATO, but support concretely in the point of view that because of the enlargement process is ongoing and strategic concept in Madrid reassured this enlargement as a success. And Finland joined NATO without membership action plan. It should be a future enlargement model for other countries like Georgia and Ukraine uh, because in 2008, Georgia was not granted the membership action plan, but was given the promise that eventually we will become a NATO member. Russia considered it as a sign of weakness and invaded Georgia in 2008, and Russia wanted to stop Georgia's NATO accession process with the occupation. And there was the answer in NATO strategic document about Russia coming, invading, and increasing the covert operations, etc. So, if in Vilnius summit Ukraine will be promised to become a NATO member without membership action plan, it will be a good political advantage for the future membership. And we called NATO states to spread this model of Finland and eventually Sweden soon, that Georgia and Ukraine will become without membership action plan. And this is very important because Russia has leverages, despite of the statements on NATO, Russia considers that it is a leverage occupation, it is a leverage on NATO decision, and it should not be given as an instrument. Secondly, we need more instruments. Since 2015 and 16 NATO summits, Georgia had in political declaration a text that we have all tools necessary for eventual membership. So we do have the membership action plan without a name of it. And we need more security support and defense support as well, and political decision. That when the war is over, the window of opportunity will be for Ukraine and Georgia. Now NATO is criticizing Georgia because of lack of democratic reforms, and it's like for 2 years we hear this critique, and unfortunately it is because inefficient reforms from GD in terms of the rule of law, in terms of the media freedom, and also in terms of the oversight over the security sector, democratic oversight, which is also important part of the democracy. And we don't see NATO membership in the political statements anymore from the ruling party. And me as a politician in the parliament, I always call the government to talk about NATO membership. But nowadays, it is the first NATO summit where partners are invited on NATO summit, and Georgia's political leader will not be participating there, despite the fact that I might like or dislike the prime minister of Georgia. He won't be there. It will be only Minister of Foreign Affairs, and it is a problem. And secondly, I see the options that Ukraine and Georgia as two nations striving for NATO membership together since the 2008 Bucharest summit decision might be split. And it is also challenging because whatever it is in terms of the future membership perspective, Ukraine and Georgia should be together. It will be easier for us to perform this process, and it will be easier for NATO as well, because we both have the Russian challenge in terms of the occupation, in terms of the spheres of influence which Russia considers against us, and we also share the same interest. So in this situation, I don't have much expectations from NATO Vilnius summit in terms of Georgia, and I blame the government in that regard, because they hardly work on NATO membership. They are receiving a lot of criticism in terms of democratic reforms, and they don't perform any democratic reforms in that field. And it is like not to upset Russia, to be honest. in that regard. In this situation, we need strong wording in the political communique. If we are split from Ukraine, like we were split in terms of the EU integration, it will be challenging. And I think that for NATO or for EU, Georgia and Ukraine together, this is security and not split it, because what Russia wants to maintain the influence and leverage over Ukraine and also over Georgia, because that's a historical perception of Russia, that we belong to its influence spheres or zones of privileged interest, whatever you call it. And in that situation, we need the support from NATO, despite the challenges from the government side. I am pretty sure that when the government is changed, the current one, we will perform all the necessary requirements in terms of democratic reforms, what is needed. But then the political decision should be made, and the window of opportunity should be taken by Georgia and by all NATO allies. So much is dependent on the outcome of the war, when the war is ended and how it is ended. And I'm sure it will be with the victory of Ukraine and then political decision from NATO, because I'm pretty sure that if in 2008 we would be granted membership action plan, Russia would not dare to invade Georgia, and same with Ukraine. The conflicts with which Russia is initiating, the aggressions, it's all because of the signs of weakness from the West. And it should not be admitted. And we need to perform all the democratic reforms as well.
Could you maybe give us a little primer on Georgian politics as it stands in 2023, in terms of, what the ruling party stands for, why it's been so controversial among pro-Western Georgians, when the next election is, what the prospects are for, a pro-Western change in Georgia?
Well, it will be very difficult to explain you in a very short of time, but I will try to be precise in that term. Firstly, people of Georgia support NATO and EU, and people of Georgia support democracy. But the government, the oligarchic government, Ivanishvili's role, which is a oligarch shade of, and this is very unique rule, unlike to Moldova or even Ukraine in the past. It is totally different, and don't compare to any model of the Georgian case. The ruling party was playing tango with both, with the West and with Russia. But when the war started this full-scale war started in Ukraine, all of a sudden, GD chose a different side, which is Russia. And the main development of the narratives, because we don't have any written policy, we don't have the renewed national security strategy or whatever. The main idea is to maintain the peace. I do understand the difficult situation in which Georgia is, because Georgia is occupied by Russia 20% from capital. It's 37 kilometers where Russian occupation forces are standing, and it's very close to the main highway, and it will be very, very short of time if new aggression will be and it will be easier to invade Georgia again. And these challenges, it's pretty understandable that Georgian government needs to be careful. But if you evaluate the foreign policy, current one, with the statements, not with the paper, the problem is that despite all the proper actions on international stage to support Ukraine, whether it is joining the resolutions, co-sponsoring the appeal for Ukraine with UK, etc., the statements became pro-Russian or anti-West, if you like it. So now we witnessed, after this narrative that Ukraine wants to open the second front in Georgia, now we witness the narrative that there is a global war party where the West, where Ukraine, and where opposition and civil society wants Georgia to drag into the war with Russia. It became totally against the established national interest of Georgia, which is EU and NATO, and which is democracy. They don't perform the democratic reforms necessary for NATO and EU membership. They are using the anti-West propaganda very openly. There are close patterns of Russian Kremlin disinformation techniques with the GD statements, and all of a sudden there is a question where Georgia stands, whether it is with the West or whether it is with Russia. and especially when the open flights started with Russia after it was stopped since 2019, it became more obvious. So in this situation, opposition parties are pro-Western. People are pro-Western. We do have the election in 2024, and in December we are expecting the political decision from the EU about granting Georgia candidacy status. And it is a big challenge because if the candidate status is not granted to Georgia, it will push Georgia more closer to Russia because it will be a huge way of anti-West propaganda. West will be blamed in that, opposition will be blamed of that, but not the ruling party, which is not performing the required democratic reforms. Russia will be more than happy to have it if you compare it to 2014 Russia's attempts not to let Ukraine towards association agreement, and it will be a challenging time for Georgia, especially when the election will be in 2024 October. But also there is a dilemma for the West. Without performing 12 EU recommendations, it will be very difficult to grant Georgia the candidacy status. So one thing is bureaucratic approach, another thing is geopolitical decision. And I'm in favor of granting the candidate status to Georgia despite the challenges, because it will save Georgia to be pushed more closer to Russian influences, and it will give the ability to the West as well as for the opposition to have a leverage before the election about the democratic transformation. And in this process, this is a crossroad. Georgia is on the edge. And with the partner support, we need to defend Georgia's foreign policy priority, because what we see now domestically, it's a huge disinformation, manipulation, and anti-US propaganda. And you will see lots of them from the ruling party leaders, and the manipulation is getting stronger and stronger. So, friends, we need, when we have these needs, and while we are trying to push the government to perform the reforms, but we don't see the political will to do that, because it's all about the maintaining the power. It's not about the foreign policy priority or established national interest. This will be a very challenging time for Georgia. So that is why I'm always asking Georgia's friends and allies to support Georgia even more now, because it is a crossroad and we need to overcome this challenge. And it will simultaneously will be developed while we see the success of Ukraine in Ukrainian front. Because if Russia is defeated, then the Russian influences will be decreased in Georgia as well as in the region, and it is just a matter of time. And then opposition will try its best to win the election with democratic change with pro-Western government.
You know, maybe we'd like to end on this note of opportunity that Russia's defeat in Ukraine and larger unraveling will present. Alas, not many in the West are thinking about what that means or how to accomplish it, or in it, as I sort of suggested earlier, many are sort of afraid of it. But a competent strategist would say, as part of any termination of hostilities in Ukraine, it should not be just a matter of restoring Ukrainian sovereignty and liberty and all that stuff, but in reversing the sort of Putin imperialist policy of the last 20 years, which very much includes Georgia. It obviously includes places like Transnistria and other places. And that should be considered. I mean, this has in one way been just one single war with many fronts or many flanks, or whatever the appropriate term should be. And the Prigozhin nonsense ought to remind us that this could come sooner rather than later, that the triggering event for the next level of contraction of Russian power could easily be just around the corner, and in fact is more likely to be sooner than later. But I just fear that once again we are unprepared for it. We'll be just The fact that Russia will retain a nuclear arsenal will make us take counsel of our own fears. But, like I say, I think it's just very important to try to seize the day when it comes and to be expansive in our understanding of what a good peace would be. And that goes well beyond Ukraine per se. That was not a question. The only question is, don't you agree with me?
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree. Firstly, it's not only sovereignty in terms of the territorial integrity, but it's also sovereignty in terms of the will of the people, and it's a way of life. The conflict here between Azerbaijan and Armenia, it was Russia meddling, and I'm really glad that U.S. Is mediating this process, and there will be meeting of Minister of Foreign Affairs. And if U.S. managed to reach this peace deal agreement, it will be diminishing Russia's influence in the region, which will adequately have an impact on Georgia as well. I'm sure that in Moldova conflict will also, which was initiated by Russia and Russia's interest, if this is solved, it will decrease Russia's interest, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is Georgia. But I'm sure that, like when the Soviet Union collapsed and there was the Eastern enlargement from the Soviet bloc, which brought the peace in those countries and in Europe as a whole, there is a requirement to do the same, because like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, we were striving to be part of the European family with the statement and with the behavior, with the reforms. But there is a Russia who doesn't want that. So there should be a vision, because this window of opportunity will not be for a long time. It will be just a very limited time, and that's very important that when the war is over, with the restoration of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, there is a clear policy with regard of Georgia, with regard of Moldova, and also with regard of the Armenia and Azerbaijan in terms of the region. If Russia is out with its influences from the region, there is peace, security, and stability in Europe. And Georgia, which was the champion of the reforms, democratic reforms in the former Soviet Union, can prove again that we will transform country in a democracy way, but without the security guarantees and without the umbrella, Russia will try to do it best again, and there should be no gray zones left, like it was left in terms of Georgia. And if Abkhazia and Tsin Valley region are still under Russian occupation, and if Russia managed to have Georgia back under its influence, even if Ukraine is out, Russia will do it again. And it will be again a challenge of European security, not only Georgia's headache. That's why it's very important now, when there will be a new security architecture created after the war is over, to include those countries as well, and to influence on these shared values, and to protect the shared values and security and stability.
Teona Akubardia, thank you so much for joining us and for making the case for defeating Russia and Black Sea security. From me, Yulia Zsoja, and my friends,
Stel Donnelly and
David Borohach.
thank you for listening to the Eastern Front. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. To stay up to date with the Eastern Front, please give us a follow on Twitter at Eastern Front Pod in one word, and sign up for our newsletter through the link included in the show notes. You can find more episodes and additional content on our website, ai.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you and goodbye.